So I'd like to welcome everyone to the Council briefing this evening, and I'll start by acknowledging that tonight we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. In terms of apologies, we do have apologies from Councillor Harley this evening, and Councillor Jimmy Murphy has notified that he'll be about 5 minutes late. Thank you very much. Very sensible. So without any further ado, we'll move to public question time and receiving of public statements. Basically, it's an opportunity for anyone to come forward. We just do ask that you state your name, the suburb where you live, and if you could just state the number of the item that you're speaking to, and then time for this evening. So I'll just go to declarations of interest. CEO, have we received any this evening? We have none. So that takes us to the items tonight, and to explain to members in the public gallery, this being a council briefing, it's an opportunity for council members to ask questions of administration. There's no debate or decision making this evening. So what I will do is I'll go to the items that have been raised, although I do note that that Bianca Sandry has left. But in any case, I'll go to item 5.2 first, given that that was raised first by a member of the public gallery, and that is number 12 Byron Street, Leederville, proposed 2 group dwellings. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Loden.
Just was hoping that administration could provide a response to the queries raised there. So the overshadowing is compliant, but that clause 67 M and N potentially not compliant, and suggested that the city did not assess against that. Could you provide a response to that query?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct. In terms of the overshadowing requirements under the R codes, the proposal is compliant. Okay. However, it is available to the decision maker to refuse a proposal against the due regard matters, including clause 67 M and N. Now, administration typically prepares its report based on departures sought against the policy framework, being the R codes, and built form policy, and that's captured in the city's or administration's assessment. In that assessment, it actually specifies that there is no discretion being sought in regards to overshadowing. So on that basis, there wasn't any further discussion in the body of the report. However, in acknowledging that there was concerns raised during the course of community consultation, in the schedule of submissions, administration has responded to the overshadowing matter. However, it's around the fact that it does comply with the deemed to comply requirements, and therefore it should be supported. Now, in saying that, in terms of its the actual impact on the adjoining properties, it is acknowledged that given the orientation of the lot, it will overshadow 10 and 10A Byron Street. However, if you have a look at the plan that's been circulated, there is predominantly covered roofed areas to that side. There are some outdoor living areas, but those areas have been covered. So if you were to explore refusal based on clause 67 M and N, I would be very clear in terms of what is the actual impact on that adjoining property from that overshadowing.
Councillors. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor, through to the planning staff. Just looking at, I haven't had the chance to do a site inspection of this, so I do have to apologise. I'm just relying on Google at the moment. But I just did note that in reference to the application, the steep slope of the driveway, which was compared through to similar driveway in number 10. So I just really want to get a handle on, I suppose, in terms of heavy rains, and if there's any history of flooding along that street, and whether a driveway, a council approving a driveway like that, whether that actually leaves us liable at any stage of the future with regards to potential flooding of the runoff down that steep driveway.
Through you, Mayor Cole, happy to take that on notice and explore further or better understand if there have been any concerns around the slope of the driveway and therefore any, I guess, runoff relating to flooding on the premises. Typically, stormwater is to be contained on site. Now, given the slope of the site, they don't really have a choice. It's going to run off onto that property and down the driveway. There are drainage, or there is drainage solution in that way, and that would just need to be provided on site, stormwater solution. So that's not something that I guess would hold up the consideration of the proposal, but absolutely the site does slope from some 3 metres from the front to the rear, so quite significant.
Councillor Gontaszewski.
In the briefing notes, would it be possible to get the street setbacks that have been used in the calculation and also the estimate, I guess, or otherwise, of the upper floor setbacks of any of the dwellings that have an upper floor? Is that okay?
Yes, we can provide that through the briefing notes. I actually have them on hand, but I won't make you jot them down because there's some 9 of them. I will just provide some comment, though, that in regards to the immediately adjoining properties, specifically for 10 Byron Street, that is set back 4.3 metres to the ground level, so it is the same setback. But yes, through the briefing notes, we'll provide all of the street setbacks that we use to calculate the average.
Councillors? Yes, sure.
I'm possibly going to ask this about every application that comes through to us, but is their bin store big enough to accommodate 3 bins? And if doesn't look like it, would that be something worth raising with the applicant at this point? I'm sure these things can get changed at a later point, but just whether we've raised that with the applicant at all?
Through you, Mayor Cole, happy to take that on notice and explore further whether it was specifically raised with the applicant.
Councillors, Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just a follow-up question on the overshadowing. In the response to the submissions, it refers to this property meeting the deemed to apply for the parent lot. Can you please, either on notice or now, just give me an explanation of how that impacts in this particular situation? Because my understanding of looking at the map that's been provided is that that percentage calculation is for the whole lot or for the whole multiple dwelling next door, but that perhaps has a bigger impact on each of the individual lots, as illustrated here.
Through you, Mayor Cole, so how it works is under the R codes, for group dwellings, the definition of which is group dwellings is what's existing on the adjoining property. Under the definition of lot, for the purpose of group dwellings, it's referred to as the parent lot. So therefore, it's not the individual strata lots. On that basis, with overshadowing calculations, it's proportionate to the entire parent lot on the adjoining property. That's why it is compliant.
Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Given that the applicant's representative, or the neighbour's representative has made a request or a suggestion that it would have been easy to flip the design and place the access to the south, can we just get some detail in the briefing notes about the development of number 8 and 10, whether there were any setback variations to the north and whether there were any designs presented by the proponent to actually set at any stage in the process for 8 and 10, whether there was any consideration of actually providing that northern buffer within their own site, because I assume 8 and 10 were developed together. So if we can just get an indication as to whether there was any consideration during that application process to provide for access to northern light within their own lot boundaries of the 2 lots, please.
No problem. Yep.
Councillors, just following on the overshadowing question, Manager, just in relation to page 63 where it has the overshadowing diagram, could we have a little bit more detail about the outdoor spaces in the neighbouring property so that you can actually see how much of the outdoor spaces are overshadowed?
can be provided through the briefing notes.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Councillor Gontaszewski has requested the street setbacks. Is it possible to do it diagrammatically? I think that worked really well for a previous application. Thank you.
Yep, we can arrange it.
And I also just have a question about the garage and the way that the where am I? The porch is sitting right back behind the garage. Just in terms, I know that this has been to the DRP chair and that they have sort of been through a process, made changes, etc. But with the, in terms of bringing that porch forward, I just feel that setting that porch entry back so far, for me, that does impact on the dominance of the garage, setting so far forward. I know that hasn't been raised, doesn't appear to have been raised by the DRP chair.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the DRP chair comments on page 44, when they did review this, they did suggest considering that entry door location. In response, albeit pretty minor, the applicant did move the entry door some 1.5 metres closer to the street, but I take on board that it's still 10 metres away from the frontage. I guess there's different ways of viewing this in terms of the dominance on the ground floor. I'm of the view that if you were to pull that entry forward to inline or in forward of the garage, I guess that would create internal corridor in terms of the passageway. I'm not sure if that's the greatest arrival for the dwelling internally. I guess the intent of the access door being visible from the street is that it's still clear in terms of pedestrian access. I'm of the view that the development isn't of a scale that you get lost in terms of that entrance. It's I think it's about 7.5 metres wide in terms of the dwelling itself. So I personally don't think that that is an issue, but I'm not sure if you want me to put that to the applicant. Is that your suggestion?
Well, I understand that you don't see it as an issue, and the DRP chair raised it and there's been some attempt to deal with it. I mean, it is north-facing, could have beautiful windows all along the north, and, that doesn't necessarily have to be a dark corridor, because I know what you're saying about having internal corridors. I guess the question could be asked, but it certainly would just be something if they were interested and willing to do it, not something that would be grounds for refusal on that matter. And the other issue that was raised in relation to the neighbouring, the neighbours' representative asking for this to be flipped so that the access driveway was on the south side. I assume then that this development would suffer from overshadowing if a second storey was built next to this development of a similar nature to what 10A are experiencing potentially.
To clarify, are you suggesting if this development was flipped that it would be impacted by overshadowing on the adjoining property to the north?
Yes, well, at the moment it appears to be a single-storey dwelling, a character home, which, may be there forever after or may not. But I guess what I'm saying is that if this development was flipped as the neighbouring property is seeking, that then this development would potentially be dealing with the similar issues that the neighbouring property is seeking to address.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is correct. Ultimately, it's just a broader issue with the orientation of the lots, and ultimately overshadowing is going to occur. It's about what is the impact of that if it doesn't comply with the deemed to comply requirements.
Sure, thank you. Any further questions on Byron Street? Okay. So the next item raised by a member of the public gallery was item 6.1, which is North Perth Common Closure Report. Councillor Hallett.
Through the Mayor to Director of Infrastructure and Engineering. Would you be able to provide some more information about the rationale for changing the tree stock, the criteria for selecting the replacement species, and also comment on the concerns raised about proximity of the chosen species to the wall of the adjacent building, and what the ongoing maintenance costs would be for these trees given the proximity to power lines and a comparison with the costs of replacing these with an alternative species in the short term?
Through you, Michael, that's quite a lot of questions, so I might have to review that. But so the trees were selected at the request of council, partly because council wanted to see native trees planted in the square, so that was one of the reasons for choosing the particular tree that we did. It was also chosen because it has a non-invasive tree root system, and it's in line with the street tree selection tool. Obviously, we discussed that quite a lot at council, so you'll be aware of that. Some of the issues raised, we don't believe they'll reach 25 metres. The first reason is that there are power lines there, so the trees will always be pruned away from the property line and will also be pruned beneath the power lines. And we also think that in that location, even if the power lines weren't there and the tree was allowed to just grow unrestricted, it would likely only reach 10 metres. That's the advice we've received. So. Now, if the power lines were to be removed, I mean, there's no plans immediately to remove the power lines. There's a good chance that tree would be in the line. The particular tree in question would be in the line of the of where the power lines would be situated. So at that stage, we'd look at the tree and whether the tree would survive anyway. The tree would need to be removed. So if we were in a future scenario where the power lines were to be removed, then it's likely that tree would be removed at the same time. You might have to remind me, Councillor, of some of the other questions there.
And this can be on notice, a comparison of the costs of maintaining that pruning, etc., versus replacing it with a smaller tree or alternative species.
Yeah, through you, Michael, we can look at that. I think part of the issue, though, is we're struggling to find a tree that will remain small enough that will not require some form of maintenance. But we'll certainly look into the difference of cost.
Councillors, Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. A couple of questions. Firstly, we heard from the adjoining landowner this evening, and his research on the tree indicates that it is self-pruning and drops limbs without warning. Can we just get some confirmation as to the city's assessment of that risk and what the nature of the safety in relation to safety and the limbs on the particular species? And I know there's been discussion at length about the location, particularly the tree that sits at the southwestern corner, which is the bit closest to North Perth Plaza. There was some discussion at that site meeting, and since I know that I've had discussion about the ability of the tree to provide any shade to the grassed area, even at maturity, given the required pruning, its proximity to the building and the required pruning to remain clear from the power lines. I would be interested in, separate to the closure report or the closeout report, I'd be interested to get an assessment from the team as to whether, not just about species, but whether there would be a more appropriate location for a tree somewhere in that western side that would, whether it was deciduous or evergreen, that would be able to provide a level of shade to the grass area. Because in the event that that's not the case, if I could please get an understanding of, at maturity, what we expect the shade coverage of the grassed area to be and which trees would provide that shade, given the location of the power lines, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, through you, Michael, I'll take both those questions on notice.
I did have one other as well. I apologise if I missed it all, but there isn't any discussion in the report about the change of the colour of the paving from the original proposed design. There was a dark paving in the majority and then a light colour, which was the rings or the circular elements, due to the likely impact of heat. I understand that we changed the colour to be a more neutral grey than the darker grey for the main area, but we didn't then make a commensurate change, as I can tell, to the circular elements, which means they're a lot closer in colour. And I will reserve my comments for next week, but I get my reading of it when I stand in the space is that the circular elements are somewhat lost with the current paving layout. Can I get an answer, or I suppose some commentary as to why we didn't flip it and then have darker areas for the rings so that they were still distinct, and whether, as the space evolves, whether that is something that would be changeable, and I guess an indication of what those costs would be. I'm not intimating that we're going to look to go and rip the paving up and redo it, but I guess a reason as to why that contrast wasn't preserved with the change of the main area of the paving.
Yeah, through you, Michael, I'll take that on notice as well.
Thank you, Michael. Just a question in relation. So first, I just need to clarify. So there's a tree that's planted under power lines that grows way higher than power lines. But if those power lines were ever going to be removed, instead of the tree being able to flourish, the tree would be pulled out. Is that correct?
Through you, Michael. What I'm saying is that potentially the line, if the power lines were to be undergrounded, the line of that power line would be through the middle of that tree. So there's a good chance that tree would need to be removed, and we'd have to look at another option, whether a different one was planted. And the other thing to say is that's an unlikely scenario. As we sit here today, there's no plans to underground those power lines.
And my other question just relates to the tree selection tool that the city has developed. And if I could get some information in relation to the types of trees that the tree selection tool, or if the tree selection tool identifies trees appropriate for town centre planting, and or planting in areas that have power lines, whether that's something that has been factored into the matrix that was used to do in the tree selection tool development. I can't recall. And then, yes, just in terms of the maintenance as to the frequency of pruning and what the triggers are, whether it's a timing pruning or whether it's based on report or inspection, as to ensure that these trees, the tree does not impact power lines, what the city's plans are there.
Yeah, through my call, I'll get some commentary from Manager of Parks, and I'll take that question on notice.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
There was also concern raised about the ability of wheelchairs to access around that site. Can you just clarify if there is sufficient space allowed with where the tree is, as it is now, but also once it's fully grown too?
Yeah, through my call, I've measured the gap myself. It's 1.2 metres. It does meet the minimum standard. I mean, it's not perfect and it's not ideal, but it does meet the standard.
Councillors. Noting that the project management framework is new to the City of Vincent, I just wanted to ask, in relation to the recommendations of the project closure report, it talks about monitoring the function of the space, continuing so that adjustments can be made if needed to furniture and landscaping, that a traffic study should be undertaken to see the change of speeds and behaviours, and potentially looking at one-way, left turn only, etc., and monitoring of pedestrian movements and use of the space, particularly the 2 apple gum trees. I had assumed that some of this information would have already been captured and included in the project closure report, but if that isn't the case, could we perhaps have some dates on when traffic studies will be undertaken and when we will know the outcomes of those traffic studies, and some more information on pedestrian movements. There was a question previously, I think, around whether we would look at someone who's, in terms of the trafficability of the tree well cover from an access and inclusion perspective. I think that sort of information would have been useful in the project closure report. And if it's not now available for things like how we're finding use of furniture, etc., then it would be good to know at what point those sorts of decisions will be ready to be made and when we can have information on the traffic study.
Yeah, through you, Michael, I can certainly provide some additional information.
Thank you. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I was going to reserve it till next week, but seeing as you've asked a list of things to be addressed in there, I will add a request as well. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that there was an artwork that was commissioned as part of the planned projected art, yet it was somehow there was, whether it was miscommunication or otherwise, and that's what I guess I'd be most interested in, the artwork that was produced was not appropriate to project through the projector for which it was intended. So I'd like to know what's happened with that artwork and whether it's in the city's, whether the city owns it, whether we paid the full commission on it, and what has happened to that artist and that artwork, and also just looking to the future of how that could be avoided in the future for use of the projection.
Through my call, I can certainly get some information from the manager of marketing and add that to the information provided to elected members before next week.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
And just regarding the lessons learned workshop, when's that intended to be held and who would be in attendance?
Through my call, sorry, Councillor, are you referring to a specific part?
Yeah,
of the
it's in the
report?
closure checklist, and it's one of the items that's not been completed or got a date against it. 5 down. Happy to have that on notice.
Through my call, this item was discussed at a council workshop. I believe that was the forum for that discussion, but I can check and update the report before next week.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the last item that was raised by a member of the public gallery this evening, which was item 5.5, number 42 Woodville Street, North Perth, proposed 6 multiple dwellings. This is an amendment to an approval unauthorised existing development. Any questions in relation to this item? I'm just seeking to confirm that the neighbours on the north have all consented and provided a signed letter of support.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's my understanding, but I will confirm and put that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We'll now start at the beginning of the agenda and deal with the items that we haven't already asked questions on. So that takes us to 5.1, 12A Nova Lane, North Perth, single dwelling. Councillor Loden.
I was just curious what percentage of the front of the dwelling is a carport, and if that would comply with our proposed amendments to the built form policy that are in the process of going out for consultation.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the frontage occupied by the garage, it's 62.5%, so it's 6.2 metres wide, and the deemed to comply is 60%, or 6.02 metres. In saying that, there is a section in the officer's report around the garage width. Assessment's been undertaken. In terms of the frontage itself, it's 10 metre wide lot, so it's quite narrow. A double garage is going to occupy a significant amount, acknowledging the impact from that. It's also noted that this is a laneway which is historically used for garaging of vehicles, and this is quite a common development form where you've got a garage on the ground floor that occupies predominantly the entire width of the development, and then the living areas atop that. So that's a consistent or prevalent development form along this portion of Nova Lane. But nonetheless, yes, they are seeking a slight discretion in terms of the garage width.
Can I just ask a follow-up question to that and ask what does that actually amount to in either centimetres or just as a measurement, that 2.5%, what does that equate to? You can take it on notice if you don't have it at hand.
62.5% is 6.2 metres.
But I'm looking for the difference between the compliant 60% garage versus the variation of 62.5%.
Sorry, 18 centimetres.
Okay, thanks. questions, councillors? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Just want to check on a couple of things. Just on page 11 regarding the lot boundary walls. Average wall height 5.6 metres, but a maximum wall height of 5.16. Am I reading that correctly, or is that a typo?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that has to be a typo. Can I please take that on notice, and I'll correct in the briefing notes and amend the report.
Just following up on the calculation on the canopy of which of the trees were included in the canopy calculation. I noticed that there's a coral gum and a Judas tree, but they did also refer to 26 apple blossom hibiscus trees, which I would probably, more include a shrub than a tree. So can you just let me know which of those were included?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can take that on notice and confirm that.
And I'll steal this one away from Councillor Gontaszewski on the bin store. Just to check on that as well.
Councillors? Just a question in relation to the parapet wall. It talks about in the report that the height exceeds the existing parapet wall on the neighbouring property by 1.6 metres, no overshadowing, etc. Just a query about whether the neighbour's supportive of that variation to the boundary wall.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there was only one submission received during the course of advertising, and that was really around visual privacy, but more so the boundary wall finish. Now, the boundary wall finish, so it's not specifically around the height or the proposal itself, but in terms of the finish, that's typically something that we would impose a condition around the finish of that, either being rendered or face brick. Face brick being what's actually on site at the moment. So from that regard, that's a matter that can be addressed by virtue of a condition being imposed.
Thank you. And just in relation to the visual privacy from the first floor dining room, is there a kind of vision diagram? I just don't recall seeing one for that. It's possibly there. No. I think that I was just interested to see if it was possible to get a kind of vision diagram, because it talked about the fact that was not, it wasn't direct overlooking because of the either a boundary wall or, sorry, I haven't got the exact place in the report, but talked about whatever was on the neighbouring property prevented that from being direct overlooking. But sometimes it is useful to see a kind of vision diagram when you're looking at something like that where it's impacted by what's on the existing neighbouring property.
Noted. There is a discussed in the report itself in terms of what it does overlook. However, acknowledged, we can prepare a diagram, superimpose what would otherwise be viewed.
If that's not too labour intensive, I don't want you to have to waste too much time on that. And just a final question in relation to the site works, 1.2 metres at the rear. I just wanted to double check on any impact on the rear neighbour, noting that there is a right of way between the two.
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the impact, it's really to address the slope of the land. This site is again affected by a gradient. So on that basis, it's in order to make the site developable, some form of retaining is required. And on that basis, it's administration's view it's not going to impact the ability to construct at the rear.
Any further questions on Nova Lane? Okay, we'll move on. Next item is 5.3, 434 to 446 Lord Street, Mount Lawley, change of use from warehouse showroom to educational establishment. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Just a question as to why there isn't a delegation, or is the reason that this is coming to us because it's a de-use and there's no delegation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the reason it's coming to council is because educational establishment is not in the car parking policy itself. So it's not an identified use, so therefore it needs to be presented to council for determination.
Can I just ask that information be carried through to our integrated transport plan working group so that we avoid that in the future for applications like this, both for the applicant and the city in terms of workload, please?
No problem. Yes.
So just following up on that, when we recently dealt with delegations, we did delegate administration's ability to deal with educational establishments, but you're saying because it's not dealt with in the parking policy, therefore that delegation can't take effect?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay, good to know. We need a policy change. Any further questions? Councillor Hallett.
I just couldn't see it in the report. Do we have any more information about the end of trip facilities, what that involves, and availability of bike parking?
Through you, Mayor Cole, end of trip facilities are currently provided in the adjoining tenancies, units 3 and 4, which ultimately it's the same operator. That's the units 3 and 4 are currently the head offices for this company. So they've got end of trip facilities there in terms of shower, you can change there. In terms of bicycle parking, happy to take that on notice to confirm because they're not proposing additional bicycle parking as part of this proposal, but happy to confirm the existence of any bike parking available on site.
Councillors. I just had a question about the hours. I note that it's 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. 7 days a week. Is that because the applicant requested till 4 p.m. Yes, because I'm just a question around whether we just need to have standardised hours in a commercial zone for weekdays. I have come across a few applications where people have said, these are my operating hours, but I'm actually operating beyond and they change over time. Is there any reason why it wouldn't be, say, 8 till 5:30 in a commercial zone on a weekday?
Through Mayor Cole, no objection to extending the operating hours. I think that's entirely reasonable in a commercial zone. That is the hours that were sought from the applicant, so this is the challenge in terms of assessing what's before us. But if the hours were to be extended, I don't think that would cause any detrimental impact on adjoining tenants.
Yeah, I think it's just something to consider moving forward, that where you're dealing with sort of commercial zones, town centres, etc., and we're dealing with applicants coming in and requesting things where they might say, I'm operating classes between 9 till 11 and then 1 till 4. I think we should just look at what are reasonable hours for the type of operation potentially in those centres or commercial areas, because I think sometimes that can lead to problems going forward when changes happen in operation. But that wasn't exactly a question. There's a question mark at the end. Do you believe this is worth considering moving forward?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, and probably best lived in a policy position.
Councillors? Okay. Next item is 5.4, Outcomes of Advertising Mount Hawthorn Town Centre Place Plan. Any questions, Councillor Loden?
Thank you, Mayor. On item 1.4, the nighttime economy, it talks about engaging with the business community around how to encourage a nighttime economy. I just wanted to ask if there will be discussion with the community about whether there is demand for a nighttime economy as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just clarifying, you said discussion with the community, not committee. Yeah, that can certainly be included in that project.
Would that require an amendment, or is that fine?
Through you, Mayor Cole. No, I can just make a note of that when we action. So you'll notice that a lot of the submissions that have been put through have detailed commentary around how the city should implement the actions. So when we develop the project plan for that and work through the process along with council members, that's where that kind of information will best belong.
On item 2.3 around Edinburgh Street parking, it talks about creating additional bays, and given it also talks about the issue of that there may be people parking all day, will we also consider the alternative of parking restrictions to then create greater availability and avoid having to create the additional bays?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, the parking restrictions and parking in general is being dealt with through the integrated transport plan. So that will consider whether it's most appropriate in this particular situation to create additional bays, how many additional bays would be suitable, and what level of restriction is appropriate to ensure that bays are available for the users.
And then my last one was just on item 2.1, Oxford Street and Scarborough Beach Road intersection. It talks about prioritising the space for pedestrians, but also will that also prioritise the space for bikes as well? Noting, I believe there has been some discussion of including a head start point at the top of Oxford Street as part of the budget process.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I know that has been discussed, and I believe there was a trigger for when it would be most appropriate to include the Head Start bay. I'll just take that one on notice and include it in the briefing notes.
Does the Director for Environment and Infrastructure know on that one?
Through you, Mayor Cole. I'm not sure about the trigger. I think that the design included that particular feature, but Main Roads didn't approve it, is my recollection. So I can get some information on that and put it in the notes.
Councillors. Councillor Castle.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm just wondering if you can give us any information about the submitters that were involved, specifically whether they, if they were individuals or businesses or the town team, and did we specifically engage with any of those groups to make sure that we got responses from them?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yep, we went out on site or in the Mount Hawthorn area and did a delivery of the postcards to the business owners, plus all of the nearby residents were also made aware through posters and on-site kind of engagement. The Mount Hawthorn Hub had a meeting, their last meeting, where the draft plan was presented, and so it's a kind of a combination of the business owners, individuals and town team representatives that all made submissions.
And do we have plans from now to feed some of those submissions or all of those submissions back to the Mount Hawthorn Hub? Because on reading some of the ideas, they may well be initiatives that the hub could undertake as opposed to the city, or identifying other groups such as the BAG that might get involved in some of the suggestions that came through.
Through Mayor Cole, yeah, we're having ongoing dialogue with the Mount Hawthorn Hub, particularly regarding the role of the place plan and the actions and the role of the city and what their role is. I know they've got a relatively new committee. They've got some interesting projects that they're looking at undertaking, so we're working with them closely to align where possible the consultation that the city is doing and the work that the hub is doing.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just, it's an aside probably, but also, so if should this be approved, I believe that the Highgate Mount Lawley place plan is next up on the agenda, and just what the plan is for the delivery of the next place plan that is part of our delivery this financial year.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we are preparing this financial year, we're preparing the Leederville Place Plan and the Mount Lawley Highgate Place Plan. So we'll go through a similar process of consulting with the local community, gathering ideas, putting the document together and workshopping that with council before going through the formal process.
And I understand that the Leederville plan is somewhat progressed. The Highgate Mount Lawley Place plan, is there a project plan available for that would set out the timelines for engagement for that process?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that can be provided in the briefing notes.
Councillors? Okay. The next item was a late item, so it might not appear on your agenda paper, but it is item 5.6, Environmental Health Australian National Conference 2019. Are there any questions on this item? Councillor Loden?
Just wanted to understand what the city's practice is in terms of reporting back when people attend conferences, and if there's any way that those could be shared with council in advance of the public health plan that we are undertaking this financial year.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we'll absolutely request that the officer present to the council members at a council workshop to share the learnings from the conference, and in addition to that we can do a report which specifically shows which learnings from the conference are being embedded into the public health plan.
Councillor Hallett, is this an expression of interest? Go ahead.
Slightly tangential as well. Just wondering if on notice we could get a little bit of a overview of, I guess, the workforce planning and the role of professional development within that for staff, broadly beyond conferences.
Yes, we can provide that in the briefing notes.
Any further questions on 5.6? Okay. We have dealt with 6.1 as that was questions received by a member of the public gallery. So we're moving to 6.2, minor parking restriction improvements amendments. Any questions in relation to this item? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got a question with regards to the ACROD parking. Are these given a time limit? Is that consistent with the rest of the area, or considering that it's been put in place to be in line with the doctor's appointments, would consideration be given to maybe reducing the time limit? So I just want to get an understanding on use of those ACROD bays.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a very good question, and I'll need to take it on notice.
Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Fotakis, keep going.
It's just a follow-up to that one. It's just similar on the loading zone parking. So just noticed on the signage, for those that I've never noticed, having never parked in a loading zone, but are there time restrictions on the loading zones as well, and how are they managed?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll double check that. I believe there's a time, 15 minutes, but I'll double check that and give you some more information before next week.
Councillor Konchevsky.
Just two questions in relation to the loading zone. One, is there any, and I'm presuming there's not because we haven't referenced it, is there any, I guess, sort of standard around the frequency with which a loading zone would be provisioned within the public realm? And the second question is, I note that it's recommended that the loading zone have the operational hours to match the adjacent restrictions. And my question would be whether that, I can understand the merits of that, and then, but also in relation to whether the businesses, I presume they're operating within those hours, but just to get confirmation that they aren't going to be having need for that loading zone outside of the 8:30am to 5:30pm Monday to Friday.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I don't believe there's any frequency of loading zones. It's just where we feel that they are appropriate. This is in a light industrial area, so we think it's appropriate. But the second question about the restriction and the operation of the business, I'll just need to check that, so I'll take that one on notice.
Councillor Fotakis.
I just had one more, thank you, Mayor. It's just confirming that Acro parking is not paid.
Sri McCall is correct, it's not paid.
Councillors? Okay, thank you. Next item is 7.1, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st to 31st of August 2019. Councillor Hallett.
Just wondering if it's possible to get a high-level breakdown of what the annual subscription for Wauga, almost 67 grand, gives the city. Can be on notice.
Yes, Remeko, we can put that together.
Do you just subscriptions generally? I know there was a report to council some time ago that actually looked at the value of Wauga services generally, which was very comprehensive, and I think that was before your time, Councillor Hallett. There was an assessment. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about? So there is a report on record going back a couple of, probably 4 years or so, that actually analysed the value of Wauga services. Yep. Next question. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. It's more just a request. Where we use external consultants, particularly for legal advice, others, if we could perhaps, and particularly if there are invoices relating to multiple matters, rather than asking the question of if we could perhaps have that just either broken down in the way that it's assessed or provided in the notes. So, for example, if there's $15,000 worth of consultancy fees for a particular consultant, if we could get an idea of that's 1, 2, 3 applications, or what that actually relates to, that would be appreciated. So I think I've asked a question about the one this relates to separately, the subject of the specific question, but just to get a better understanding where we are using external consultancy services, and particularly planning consultancy and legal consultants, where we get an invoice that might come at the end of 3 months, for example, of work, whether that relates to 1 matter or 3 matters or otherwise, that would be helpful. Sorry, and I understand that obviously it can't appear in the accounting. It's not so easy to appear in the accounting report in that way because it gets logged as one invoice, but where we do have, and I don't know, maybe the request is that where it exceeds $10,000 or something of that nature, that we get a breakdown in the briefing notes of what that actually refers to, rather than having to ask for it specifically.
Through you, Mayor Cole, could I just clarify, is the information that you're seeking about the matter being considered, or the provider of the advice on that matter?
The matter, more so. So, for example, there is design advice and planning consultancy services at $14,000 something for Aladdin and Associates. I'm just curious as to what matter that relates to, or what matters that relates to, and to get an understanding more broadly on it as we get these monthly updates with the expenses, to see what we're spending and those sorts of things.
Given that I asked a question about, I think, a $7,000 Christmas tree, it would probably be remiss of me not to ask for the $41,000 installation, dismantle and storing of 2019 Christmas decorations. Could I just ask if that's the lights in Leederville? Is that what that is? Does anyone know?
Yes, through Mayor Cole. I understand it is, but I need to take it on notice and confirm with the Manager of Marketing and Communications.
And yes, it's just if we could probably clarify that maybe in the line item.
This is sort of relevant. I was just wondering, in terms of the financial and investment reports, normally they're listed as late items if they're coming to the council meeting late. Will they be coming to the council meeting?
No, through you, Mayor Cole, those 2 reports will be circulated next month, given the end of financial year. End of the month is so close to this date, and we're currently finalising the budget review, and the auditors are in the building at the moment going through the budget, where we'll be presenting those to the next month, and that accords with the regulation requirements, which requires those reports to go to council within 2 months.
Glad I asked. Thank you. Any other questions on expenditure? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to confirm there's a cost there from the 14th of August for event sponsorship, North Perth local, $15,000, but the payee is listed as North Perth Business and Community Association Incorporated. I'd not noticed that before. I mean, normally most of our town teams are registered out under their trading name. Is that just confirming that is paid to North Perth local?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that is paid to North Perth local. That's correct.
I just also had another query on the rates of the depot, 27,000. Is there any sort of special arrangements that local governments can do with application of reduced rates, just the same as consideration that we have for many of our organisations? I just noted that is quite a hefty rates bill.
Through Mayor Cole, I don't think there is, but I'll take that on notice and we'll provide a response.
Councillors? Okay, moving on to 8.1, consideration of submissions on acquisition of Luce Lane? Luce Lane, North Perth. Any questions? Councillor Hallett?
Is it possible to have a copy of the letter that went to notify the landowners about the requesting submissions?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can provide that to council members.
Any further questions? Councillor Gonchevsky?
Can I just ask, because I'm having a gender issue, so this could be me. What was there a reason for the gap between the previous decision and the initial notification? It appeared that there was a 2013 resolution and then we advertised in June 2019, and I just wondered if there was a reason for that. Sorry, I guess more presuming that it just didn't get, like, was there a reason it got reactivated that is at all pertinent for the consideration?
Through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is that yes, it was a decision a long time ago by council. It wasn't pursued as a priority, largely due to resourcing issues in the lands and property area. I can add to the briefing notes if there was a specific reason for that delay.
Sometimes it takes a while to track down the deceased estates as well. I just have a few clarifications. I believe I know the answers, but just because I think during public consultation there seemed to be concern that this was somehow going to increase traffic on the laneway. My understanding from reading, if you could just correct me if this is right, is that this will be the same access, that it seems to service 3 homes. This will remain a no-through road, and it's not intended to increase. It was not intended to have a thoroughfare to Walcott Street. I think that was seemed to be the concern of the consultation put forward.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I can confirm all those points. There was a concern raised that this acquisition may have been in anticipation of providing a throughway to Walcott Street, and there are no plans for that, and we've confirmed that in the report.
Yep, just wanted to put it on the record publicly because that seemed to be a concern of the residents, noting it's only 3 metres wide as well. Yep. Okay. Any further questions? Councillor Fotakis.
Just a question on the maintenance of that laneway. Has that previously been a city responsibility, or would that now move on to being a city responsibility for the maintenance?
So yeah, my call is correct. It was obviously a private laneway owned by somebody privately, which we didn't maintain. This happens, it'll be added to our laneways maintenance program, so we will be responsible for maintenance. And there's some comment about that in the report about there's no immediate expenditure required. It'll just be standard maintenance as and when.
Councillors. Okay, next item is 8.2, report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 27th of August 2019. Any questions? Councillor Hallett.
Just in relation to the Auditor General's report and the City's response, apologies, I haven't read the full report from the Auditor General. Just wondering if there was any discussion around whistleblower protections within that process?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in relation to the fraud prevention local government findings recommendations, the whistleblower provisions are covered under separate policies and guidance, so it wasn't noted as a specific concern.
Any further questions? Okay, next item is the information bulletin, item 8.3. Any questions, Councillor Hallett?
Just in relation to the Safer Vincent minutes, one of the actions refers to provision of the expired CCTV strategy to council members, and just wondering if that's in progress.
Through you, Nicole, that action is recently transferred into the Infrastructure Directorate, so I know it is being worked on, and there is a date in the Safer Vincent plan for that to be presented. I just can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head.
Perhaps it could be included in the briefing notes. Thank you.
And just for clarity, I believe what was to be presented was around the objectives rather than a draft, because I think it was the objectives that were going to be discussed. If maybe perhaps the chair could confirm.
Thank you. That was my understanding.
Does that answer your question for now, Councillor Hallett? If we can also get a date in the briefing notes? Yes? Okay. Any further questions on the info bulletin? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, and just in relation to the reference to World Square food provision report coming back to us in October, just wondering if that will be discussed at all in a workshop prior to that.
Through you, Mayor Cole. Yes, I think it's scheduled to be presented to Council in November, or December. I think it's November. So yes, that will come back to Council before then. We'll have a discussion about it. I'll leave it at that.
Any further questions? I know that normally that we do get notification, Acting Director of Development Services, but has there been a decision from the SAT on 8 Moyer Street yet?
Through you, Mayor Cole, not to my knowledge, but I'll confirm that.
Thank you. Any further questions on info bulletin? No? Okay. Next is 8.4, public release of the Chief Executive Officer's Key Performance Indicators 2019-20. Any questions? Councillor Hallett?
Just wondering if the format of the KPIs that will be released publicly would be any different to the ones that have just been released publicly in the report?
An excellent question. I'd like to add a secondary question to that. Is the request for council approval a moot point, given that the KPIs are attached to the public report?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's been presented to release publicly for transparency reasons and make it clear to the community what the priorities of council are for the administration.
Yes, CEO, I'm wholeheartedly in agreement with that, but the fact is they have already been publicly released, so council hasn't actually decided that they have already been released. Any further questions on KPIs? Okay, we'll debate that next week. Not that there's much to debate. Next item is amendment to council delegations. Any questions on this item? Councillor Loden.
Just on the question around the delegation to the Audit and Risk Committee, I was wondering if you could give us an idea of the additional staff time and cost to run a public meeting versus the meeting as it's currently run. The report talks to that there's additional staff time and costs. So I just was wondering if you had an idea of how significant that would be in terms of hours or dollar value or something like that. And secondly, it also makes reference to saying that a lot of the items would be confidential. Is it a case that like nearly all items would be confidential, or would some of them actually be open to the public? So if we were sitting in this chamber, would it be a case people come in, ask questions, and then basically all have to leave because all the items are effectively confidential?
Through you, Mayor Cole, to make the audit committee meetings public, we would have to advertise them in advance, like we do other normal council meetings, and it would be my assumption that nearly all the items would be presented to the audit committee as confidential items.
Councillors, could I also ask, just in clause 2, it talks about revoking the delegation to the Audit and Risk Committee. Is that the official title of the Audit Committee? Normally it's referred to as the Audit Committee as opposed to the Audit and Risk Committee.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll just confirm the terms of reference of the audit or the Audit and Risk Committee to make sure we've got the right one.
Thank you. Any further questions on delegations? Okay. Next item. Oh, that concludes the items for this evening's meeting because we don't have any confidential items and we don't have any notices of motion. So, that being the case, I will close the meeting at 7:21 p.m. Thanks, everyone.